and welcome to Business Success in a Virtual World podcast, a resource of information for businesses to understand and embrace the innovative power of XR, VR, and AR. Each episode, we attempt to summarize what's new in this growing industry and highlight actual case studies of how these technologies are advancing success in business and enterprise. I'm Tim Bajarin, Chairman of Creative Strategies, and each episode I'm joined by Barton Goldenberg, President of ISM Inc. Together, we help our listeners navigate the ever-growing mountain of information and technologies impacting virtual worlds, the metaverse, augmented reality, spatial computing, etc. In addition to all the information presented in each episode, additional information can be found on our resource website, in which you'll discover news, products, and most significantly, over 175 actual case studies of businesses utilizing these inventive technologies. That website is found at www.ismguide.com. The XR Metaverse resource link is on that site. There you'll discover field service examples, training, customer service, manufacturing, and much, much more. It's a fast-growing and complex area destined to impact your business. Let us help you figure out the best strategies. Now, on to the next episode. In this week's podcast of Business Success in a Virtual World, Barton and I are going to take a look at a different industry, the telecom industry, who surprisingly is upbeat and actually looking pretty closely at this. 2 weeks ago, I was at the 5G America Summit, and we had an actual dedicated session on telecom and VR. And the telecom industry understands that the metaverse is an important area that they have to take a hard look at. But it's surprising that some of the key players, and especially the company that we're going to focus on today, Verizon, is already using this technology. And so, Barton, this is the case study on Verizon's use of VR. Share what you've come up with.
Thank you, Tim, and good afternoon, morning, wherever you may be. Delighted to be back to another session of our podcast. Verizon Communication is an American multinational telecommunications conglomerate. The company was formed back in 1984 as Bell Atlantic, which many of you may remember resulted from the breakup of the Bell systems into 7 regional Bell operating companies, one of which was Bell Atlantic. Then in 2000, after the FCC approved a $64 billion merger between Bell Atlantic and the telephone company GTE, this new company changed its name to what is today called Verizon Communication. Now in 2022, just to bring us right up to date, Verizon had annual revenues of $136.8 billion, which places Verizon as the 26th largest firm on the Fortune 500 list. So this is a very large player. Verizon's primary source of revenue comes from providing telecommunication services to its customers. And many of us know these services include wireless services, internet plans, television subscriptions, phone services, as well as accessories and gear for our mobile devices and for PCs. Customers pay Verizon monthly, and that's a very healthy, reoccurring revenue stream. Verizon's mobile network is the second largest wireless carrier in the United States, with 143.3 million subscribers last month. So we're talking about a very large company with a very big footprint in this country. Verizon has 1,600 retail stores in the U.S., currently employs about 117,000 employees, the vast majority of which work in the United States. Now, today's case study is special in that I'll be discussing two sides of the same coin. One side of the coin is the impact of the metaverse on Verizon, more specifically how Verizon is using XR, VR and AR in its day-to-day operations. And the other side of the coin is Verizon's impact on the metaverse as a potential co-creator of the metaverse. So a little bit different than we usually do. So let's start with the beginning, Verizon's XR, VR, AR experience. And I'm going to cover three short areas of what they're doing. So back in 2021, 3 years ago, Verizon's Learning and Development Department, which includes a small 800 personal department, began using VR training to build empathy and de-escalation skills for their customer service associates that are staffing the Verizon call centers. Before deploying the VR training, Verizon would put on this 4-hour in-person workshop and leaned on role play to deliver the de-escalation training to the associates. But they found that role playing fell short because it failed to replicate the emotional aspect of an escalating situation, and rightly so. So now, instead of role playing, customer service associates immerse themselves in a virtual world, VR training, where an avatar takes the place of the angry customers. Associates need to de-escalate this customer, who now has a face versus just a voice. And associates can hear, see, and feel the customer's frustrations more powerfully using the VR training. VR training has helped these associates gain valuable experiences that they need in a safe virtual environment. So, nobody's yelling at them in their face as they're learning. The immersive experience of trainings were found to be popular with learners that were anxious to improve and make their whole ability to learn and to apply these skills, making it a true win-win for both the associates as well as for customers. In addition to self-awareness, Verizon associates felt that it increased their confidence handling difficult customers since they were able to practice continuously using the VR training. Before deploying VR, in addition to this 4-hour in-person workshop, Verizon used to assign pre- and post-work to the business leaders across the enterprise, who in turn had to coach their teams around the content discussed in the course. And all of this, the pre and post and the actual in-session, took about 10 hours of training time, which is, a true cost to the business and to employee productivity. And listen to this figure. VR training has cut down the 10 hours to about 30 minutes, which is delivering significant savings for the company. Now, you might question the same thing I did. How can you possibly cut 10 hours down to 30 minutes? And I watched some of the tapes and the reviews. They're just immersive and it's interactive. And so you're all of a sudden, you're able to absorb a lot more, much more quickly, and remember and feel emotionally connected. In addition to the time and cost savings, customer service also felt that VR training made them much more confident because they were more aware of themselves and the way they were actually dealing with the customer. Now, Verizon expanded their VR training to a unique situation that happens only in the retail stores, and it's called snatch and grab theft, or even armed robbery. So what happens is traditional training classes or a video simply didn't give employees realistic expectation as to what would happen when they faced a situation like an armed robbery or like a snatch and grab that is, unpredictable and can be quite emotional. For the safety of everybody in the store, it's critical that the associates knew what to do when they faced such a high-stake, potential dangerous situation. To deal with this heart-pounding rush of armed robbery in a safe environment, the Learning and Development Department turned to VR safety training based on the existing security camera footage from real in-live store robberies, in conjunction with a new 360-degree filming for VR. Verizon built and piloted 3 training modules for employees, and they complemented that by store leader coaching through the nuances of a proper response in these high-stake situations. So that's Verizon's use of VR, call center, and within the retail stores for snatch and grab or armed robbery. The second way Verizon is using the whole VR, AR, XR experience is in their new partnership with Meta. So in March 2022, about a year and a half ago, Verizon and Meta announced a strategic partnership to develop advanced metaverse capabilities on Verizon's 5G fixed and mobile connectivity. So what happens is Meta will deliver virtual and augmented reality apps that Verizon again will deliver on their network. The partnership supports an innovative business model whereby the Meta apps will likely be tied to a connectivity subscription model where potential revenue sharing is cut between Verizon as well as Meta. So an interesting business model. The new strategic partnership will advance foundational metaverse technology by developing a new platform equipped to handle the core streaming and rendering capabilities that are required for metaverses, particularly VR applications. The partnership supports Verizon's network strategy to extend the company's leadership position in mobility, capturing a disruptive share of the broadband market, and create new business models and ecosystems enabled by 5G and edge computing. Building on what is referred to as their multi-access edge computer infrastructure and partnership, which has been essential to Verizon as it enters its second phase of 5G, Verizon now is building out its multi-edge access computing infrastructure, both for public use and for on-premise private use as a part of their 5G efforts, which will deliver apps and services with an expanding network of partners, including Meta. Verizon is likely to deliver significant advancements in the network latency, symmetrical bandwidth, and overall speeds of networks, three issues that are very important in the metaverse today, which will also help Meta realize its vision for more powerful metaverse optimized consumer and business apps. So that's the second one where Verizon is kind of hooked up in a strategic partnership with Meta to deliver and to work with Meta on apps. And the third one is Meta's entry into remote expertise, training, and simulation, which many of you that are following the podcast know are that some of the top three use cases for VR, AR, and XR. So earlier this year, Verizon announced the strategy of focusing on three proven enterprise use cases for AR and VR, and it employs their 5G spectrum and multi-access edge computing capability. And again, these use cases are remote expertise, also called remote assist, training. We talked about VR training, and simulation. And in simulation, that could be simulating an actual model of something, or it could also deploy what's called a digital twin, where a group can work on an existing factory or a car or an object in the 3D metaverse world. The manufacturing and healthcare industries are leading the way in applying these three horizontal applications. So they really are applications that cut across industries. And Verizon is implementing field trials for all three use cases, acknowledging the key is to find the right combination of bandwidth, software, and glasses for each application while keeping the application simple to use. Okay, that ends my first section on the one side of the coin, and that is Verizon's use of AR, VR, or XR. Tim, if you have no comments to make, I'm going to move on to the second side of the coin, and that is namely Verizon's potential to become a co-creator in the metaverse. And this, I think, is very fascinating to me. So while Verizon continues to enlarge its use of VR training, and we talked about that, while it's formed its partnership with Meta, and we've talked about that, and it's focusing on this remote expertise, training, and simulation use cases themselves, I think the bigger opportunity, maybe the biggest opportunity for Verizon, is to drive the future of the metaverse by positioning themselves as a co-creator of the metaverse rather than simply a participant. And that's like a big deal for a company that is $136 billion revenue. To think of it as now a co-creator rather than a participant. I don't know if my vision will come true. Tim will have words of wisdom here, but let me share with you some thoughts. So Verizon and many of the other telecom operators stand to benefit immensely by taking a leading role in delivering the metaverse, by enhancing customer experience. And remember, they have lots of customers, Verizon 143 million in America, by monetizing investments through adjacent services, and I'll talk about some of those in a minute, and by increasing their own operational efficiency in delivering goods to customers. But more uniquely for telecom operators, the metaverse presents a distinct opportunity for Verizon and the other players to play an assertive role in the metaverse value chain. What do I mean? So alongside the technology giants like Google and Meta and Apple and so forth, as well as online game developers. The telecom operators can leverage emerging technologies, including 5G, edge computing, analytics, artificial intelligence, so they no longer need to be relegated to the role of the pipe provider, as is often the case, but now they're paving the way to become co-creators of the metaverse. To succeed, however, the telecom operators have to now find their place in the metaverse ecosystem, taking advantage of the opportunity to position themselves as co-creators rather than just participants. So let me share with you, and this is this final section, 7 ways that Verizon can co-create the metaverse. And here we go. The first way is they can drive the development of human interface hardware that's needed for the metaverse. So Verizon can seize this moment to collaborate with device vendors to drive adoption, for example, by bundling the VR or the AR device and connectivity services and sell them directly to the consumer through their 1,600 retail stores or online. Verizon can also invest in device innovation, as well as the execution of key levers to drive profitability, such as securitization, re-commerce, and insurance.
Now,
Second,
in
yes, Tim.
in this particular point, it also behoves them to advance not only the interface but the applications themselves, dedicated just to things that they want for their customers. So while they would potentially have this level of connectivity through 5G, which by the way has got to be expanded even more so in the future, to handle the kind of throughput you're needed for especially the VR video and technology. But what they've got to do in this particular sector is customize software specifically for their customers. And that's a really key point, that this is an opportunity for differentiation. Because I do expect that when we'll go through all these 7 points, but I do expect that all of the telecom vendors eventually are going to start thinking much more seriously about how they can co-create. And in this case here, software innovation and customization is going to be the only way they can differentiate.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim. That's so insightful, and wow, what a wonderful opportunity. Second way that Verizon and the other telecom operators can help co-create the metaverse is to become the lead connectivity provider. So the development of the metaverse and the broadening of virtual worlds are directly tied to connectivity. 5G services deliver high multi-gigabit per second peak data speeds, ultra low latency, greater reliability, and uniformed experience. As 5G networks get commercially deployed, these networks will help consumers and businesses enter the metaverse. And around 2030, if I have this right, the telecom industry will witness a new shift in wireless technology towards 6G services that will provide an even higher transfer speed and lower latency. Any comments on them becoming the lead connectivity provider, Tim?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, the competition is going to be tough between AT&T and T-Mobile, because all 3 of them are basically in strong positions with 5G networks. T-Mobile actually has the largest 5G posts around the country because of their merger with Sprint. But absolutely, I think that in the end, there's going to be a massive shift by all of these 3, especially these 3 top telecom, to want to be the premier connection to mobile VR and AR. And how they deliver that is going to be a bit interesting, because while we have some of the chips already, the semiconductors there to do it, and the radios, you can't have any latency in AR and VR specifically. And that means you've got to have a constant connection. So this is going to be something that's going to evolve over time. But I do believe, as you stated, that these companies are going to have to take a position now and say, we're going to be, not only we want to be the lead, we want to show you how to lead. And I think that's how they're going to be able to really drive this forward. But it'll be interesting to see how all three of those major players try to go after this market competitively.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight, Tim. Third way that Verizon and the other telecom operators can help co-create the metaverse is to provide edge computing services. So, with millions of people soon having continuous virtual experiences in the metaverse, as Tim alluded to, in real time, today's cloud technology is unable to centralize and store all the resources that are required. Due to latency requirements, the data will need to be distributed and made available closer to the point of consumption. This puts Verizon and the other telecom operators in a prime position to provide edge computing services and to unlock more efficient data transfer, enhance perimeter security, and relieve network congestion. Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, and this becomes even more important when they apply AI technology to what they're doing. One of the big issues right now in computing has to do with these large language models and AI architectures being done in the cloud, because number one, it's very expensive to do the actual collation of the content through these services, but it's even more expensive, both in the sense of server prices and services and electricity. And so what you ultimately want to do, and the industry is really working on this, is to put more of the compute for the AI process on the device itself. And that would mean that they would be working with the various headset makers to help tie the edge computing aspect of it to the 5G architecture in order to take the burden off of the network itself. And so that's going to be a very important thing for them to try to work around with the various VR headset and companies that are working on this, because it'll again, it's a very big issue to be able to shift some of the burden to the local compute as opposed to forcing everything to the cloud.
Yep, makes good sense. And I'll just follow on with that. The fourth way that Verizon and other telecom operators can help co-create the metaverse is to leverage advanced analytics and AI capabilities to bolster their own revenues. So, for example, telecom operators have considerable experience extracting insight from all of the call data. A wealth of product, customer, and asset data will reside with the telecom operators that are participating in the metaverse. These operators are uniquely positioned to augment this data through advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, and then in turn to potentially repurpose this data to improve both decision making and to create new metaverse demand scenarios. And I think that's kind of what you were alluding to just a few moments ago.
Yeah, and analytics as a part of this is very important because it gives them the kind of information that they need to manage the network.
Yeah, and I do want to I'll actually make the point in the next one. So let's go to number 5, the fifth way that Verizon and other telecom operators can help co-create the metaverse. Lead the way in terms of providing cybersecurity, privacy, and trust for metaverse services. So today, consumers and businesses alike are increasingly concerned about their digital footprint, the integrity of their personal data. So identity authentication and management becomes more important as metaverse virtual worlds become more and more sophisticated. And here's something I thought about a lot before I wrote this case study. For the most part, Verizon and the other telecom operators are indeed trusted by consumers as data custodians, and therefore have a unique opportunity to leverage their existing good customer relationship to position themselves as identity management experts in the metaverse, and to gain and to work with the trust of the customer as they bring product to market on their own or with third parties. So leading in terms of providing cybersecurity, privacy, and trust for metaverse services. Any thought on that, Tim?
Well, and I think that's an important table stake just to get into this in the first place. If the connectivity itself is not secure,
And they're thinking that, for example, you're out and about and somebody's listening in to, uh, especially if it's a conversation or if it's critical information on manufacturing processes or, something that you're doing that needs secure connections. They have to, the customer and the user has to be absolutely convinced that that carrier is working on their behalf to secure that network. So absolutely they have to work, but they, again, that, as you stated, they've got to work really closely with the industry on that, and especially the individuals who are creating the platforms for the metaverse.
Yep. Sixth way that both Verizon and other telecom companies are helping or could help to co-create the metaverse is to develop metaverse platforms. Now, this one might be a little controversial, but I throw it out there. Many companies have and will launch their own metaverse platforms. We've seen that already. The success of the platforms will depend upon drawing as many subscribers as possible. The eventual, and this is again my vision, the eventual global metaverse platform, like we have a global internet platform, I think there'll be a global metaverse platform, will be developed by gradually combining these large and small metaverses and to help build a deeper understanding of the demand scenarios and the technical competencies shaping this global metaverse platform. Verizon and the other telecom operators should now be investing in metaverse platforms, understanding how they work. I'd go so far as to say developing possibly their own metaverse platforms.
Well, on that last point, I think developing their own would be more difficult. Um, and there's multiple reasons for that, as you can imagine. But I do agree that they have to understand every one of the major platforms and operating systems, whether it be from Apple, from Google, Microsoft, the whole Android architecture that's going to be used here. And I think in that particular context, they need to be more aware and be hiring people who understand the existing AR, VR platforms. But as far as creating their own, what they can create, and this will help them differentiate, is how their content and their architecture can contribute to whatever's in those platforms. And that's going to be in the context of how they actually deal with latency, the actual connection, the security, and all of those things. But I think you're right in the sense of pushing them in that direction, because they'll learn a lot about if they even went down the path to create their own metaverse platform. It would be more along the issue of communication protocols as opposed to a application layer.
Well, food for thought, and I've got a couple of questions, but let me finish the seventh, then I'll open it up. So let me give you the seventh and what I consider final way for Verizon and other telecom operators to help co-create the metaverse, and that's to be an orchestrator of the ecosystem, the metaverse ecosystem. So as Verizon further refines their strategy to engage in the metaverse and the other the telecom operators, they should form new partnership frameworks to unlock growth. And you've alluded to that, whether it's the meta framework or with hardware vendors or etc. Relationships with device manufacturers, technology platform providers should pivot towards long-term opportunities that are afforded by both virtual and augmented reality. Relationships with industrial vertical customers can also be strengthened by identifying new collaboration opportunities. And then there's the whole area of policymaking. So discussion with policymaking will also help operators position themselves as the orchestrator of metaverse ecosystem. Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, the at the 5G Americas Summit I was at, Analyst Summit, a few weeks ago, that issue came up a lot. The whole issue of dealing with policymakers, communicating with them on, and interestingly, it was not just the metaverse, but it was AI architectures, all related to what was going on here. Um, I think from the telecom vendors in general, they understand how to navigate these areas, especially with the FCC and with Washington policymakers and international policymakers. Um, and I think that they can play an important part of the ecosystem. Although I will suggest that in the end, they may be more drawn into the ecosystem as opposed to being able to orchestrate. The power, unfortunately, here is going to be in the hands of guys like Apple and Google and Microsoft. They're going to create the architectural framework, and you're going to get a lot of feedback from the various associations like IEEE and others who are championing and working closely on the next generation of what would be and they're not using this term, but spatial computing is their big picture right now. But I do think the ecosystem is very early in its development stage, but the telcos in general really need to be part of that discussion. If they're not, they'll have real big problems later on from the standpoint of how they work with this.
So let me close and then we'll open a couple of thoughts. So the metaverse creates a new frontier for people and businesses to interact, to trade, and to play. At this frontier, constraints of the physical world will subside as we merge physical and digital, and we'll have new levels of efficiencies and productivity in the metaverse digital world. Verizon and the other telecom operators are in a unique position, in my humble opinion anyhow, to play a leading role in development of the metaverse. And then the question, of course, is, will the metaverse be Verizon's new frontier? And I want to make a point here that it's not just Verizon. Tim's already alluded to it, AT&T, T-Mobile in this country, but there's some other very big players that are very active. And so Vodafone in Europe and SK Telecoms in Korea are also doing some fascinating work, both as using AR, VR, XR technologies, but also playing a role in helping to co-create the metaverse. I wanted to close, Tim, with a question. One of the things that I was reading in preparation for this case study was a wonderful study that ADL, Arthur D. Little, did just not that long ago. And they talked about this concept of one big metaverse platform. But they spoke of a consumer metaverse for gaming and entertainment and events and social interaction and experience and buying and selling goods. They spoke of an enterprise metaverse that does training and education and meetings and collaborative workings. And they spoke of an industrial metaverse that does design and development and simulation and optimization and operational improvement. But that's three metaverses: consumer, enterprise, industrial. In your opinion, as a Silicon Valley sage, what are we getting? We're getting one metaverse platform long term. We're getting a consumer metaverse, an enterprise, and an industrial. How does this all play out? Because that too will impact how Verizon and the other telecommunication companies will be playing in this industry.
Well, the way you think about it is the actual framework that has to develop, and you really are. The example here, unfortunately, goes back to what we would call operating systems: Windows, Mac, or iOS and Android. And then so that would be the bottom layer. The next layer is, what are the tools? The various VR, AR development tools that are there. And then what these three that you've just talked about, whether it be consumer, industrial, or enterprise, they just become silos in a sense.
Vertical, yeah.
Yeah, and there's no way you create three dedicated metaverses using three different standards, for example, or operating systems. The more we study this, and this is a very important issue for people to understand, is the leadership roles of the big guys. Again, the Microsofts, Apple, Google, even Samsung, the way they're doing it in Korea. they're all taking the approach of using their operating system layer, which all of these devices have to have as a starting point, and then committing and then working with all of the major software platforms like Unity and others in order to deliver the applications on top of that. And then in this case, you'll have, and I do think you will see those three sectors evolve. I think the industrial and enterprise will actually accelerate fastest, and then consumer will probably come a little bit later, except for gaming. The gaming side of the consumer part of VR actually leads all of these already. And then the bigger question you have there is, how big is the VR market for gaming? That tends to be at the moment more of a hardcore gamer who are willing to buy, especially the $500 plus headsets with the new MetaQuest 3 is, and others. Whereas you look at some of the headsets from Lenovo and HTC that are already on the market, and those are in the thousands, starting at about 1,000 for each headset and going more. And then you look at what Apple's doing, which is at the upper end at $3,500, and those are going to be more price tolerable to enterprise and industrial. Over time, though, that will change.
What I can say is the Verizon case study, I just thought it was a fascinating case study. They are eating their own dog food in terms of training and the Meta partnership, and in terms of focusing on the remote expertise training simulation. So they are learning, what this is all about as they figure out on the other side of the coin, how could and should they be a co-creator in the metaverse. I found it a very fascinating.
No, it is fascinating, and I am very pleased to see that they're taking that lead. It'd be interesting to look and see also if T-Mobile and AT&T are integrating some of this, and we may in future podcasts report back on that. But yeah, I just think the telco industry is going to play a very big role, especially for mobile AR and VR. The actual transmission or the rates of transmission data at the moment with 5G, and the fact that you don't have connectivity everywhere is problematic, and that's going to change. You brought up one other point about 6G, by the way, and again, these are 10-year increments. We won't see 6G before 2028, 2030-ish. And actually at the 5G America Summit, we actually talked about the actual specs for 6G already being put in place. The earliest 6G transition would be 2028, and more likely closer to 2030. But you can imagine how much advance we're going to have already with these headsets, and AR especially, by that particular time. And I think that if you were looking at the real impact that 5G and or mobile connectivity is going to have on this, is really going to be a few more years down the road. However, if these big players don't put their stake in the ground now and drive that going forward, they will literally miss the boat. Thank you for being with us for this week, and we look forward to having you join us on our next podcast. Goodbye for this week.
For more information on this and other case studies, please check out the website www.ismguide.com and click the link for XR Metaverse Resource Center. We look forward to you joining us next time on another episode of Business Success in a Virtual World.